Go. Hello and welcome to the 24sight pod. I'm Tom LoBianco, national politics reporter for 24sight.
Warren Rojas, Washington correspondent for 24sight here as well.
And we are joined today by two of the best pollsters in the industry who are keeping tabs on what the voting public is thinking this cycle. We're joined by Celinda Lake, president of Lake Research Partners and a longtime pollster for President Joe Biden. And Chris Matthews is the president of Bellwether Research, veteran pollster, particularly for Republicans in the past. And she's currently working with the Senate campaign of Larry Hogan, who could be a new Republican senator from Maryland if it all shapes up. Thank you so much for joining us. This is
Thanks for
awesome.
having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
You got a piece that came out. You've been working on this, writing the op-eds for USA Today, and you got a piece. This is really shocking. Is Trump or Biden the true threat to democracy? Voters split along partisan lines. As a political junkie, I'm reading this. I'm like, what's the split? How is there a split here? Like, what'd you find?
I know, right? So democracy is defined differently if you're a Democrat or if you're a Republican. So think about it. So all of Joe Biden's supporters and Democrats tend to think that, democracy is about, Trump not accepting the, results of the election, January 6th, 2020, the election was stolen and, possible threats to be, autocratic and, jail opponents, that sort of thing. But Republicans actually view Biden and the Democrats as a threat to democracy. And how they see that, for example, is over 60% of Republicans think the election was stolen. Like they believe that, like, Biden got away with something. And so if you believe that the last election was stolen, how is it that democracy is in good shape? You know what I mean? So it really does depend on your prism, like everything else.
It's like democracy has already been sacked, and we're like in this. Wow, jeez.
I
Yeah.
think the other thing that's real, even other concepts, and this concept and this point was really Chris's origin, and she's so smart in identifying this. But even the word freedom, which freedom used to be it's the number one value to Americans. It used to be the number one word that the right used more than the left. The left is now using freedom, but
Really?
our definitions of freedom are quite different. Our definitions of freedom are abortion, the freedom to be who you are. The other side's definition of freedom is freedom to not have your family confronted by values they don't share, freedom for the Second Amendment. So, even core definitions of basic values and principles differ depending on which party you're in.
I feel like there was a time right after January 6th where a lot of Republicans like understood what happened, and or at least the elected ones, certainly in Congress. What changed to get to this point to where the big lie, as some people still call it, regarding Trump and January 6th and his effort to overthrow his election loss? How and why did that change? How did we get to a point where all of a sudden you have a large chunk of the populace saying that Joe Biden is allegedly a dictator? Like, what happened?
It was interesting. There was a moment in time in January when Trump's fortunes, or his reputation was sort of sloping downward, and so it was safe enough to say that, to stand up and say the election wasn't stolen, this is wrong. And I saw it with the work that we were doing with Republican primary voters. They were like, he needs to move off of this. It's time for him to stop talking about the election being stolen. And this is actually January of 2022 is when I'm thinking about it. But then in March, the first criminal indictment came out, of him. And then all of a sudden it became us against them again. And Trump didn't go anywhere. And then he was the victim again. And then it was the outside forces, out to get him again. And so there was a moment in time, and it was it was really, after the 2022 elections that Republicans could have moved on from Trump, but then like everything solidified back in his favor again.
You mentioned that the midterms is a kind of a pivot point, and kind of now we're back in his thrall, and now we're back into it. I think both the House and Senate Republicans did, they reframed a lot of it, as you're saying, in terms of, oh, Trump is calling him Crooked Joe. We have to impeach him. We're going to find a reason to impeach him, by any means necessary. And that's why they're trying to impeach Alejandro Mayorkas, which they did by the skin of their teeth, which didn't go anywhere in the Senate. They still have the impeachment probe of Biden, although they haven't been able to connect the dots to their satisfaction. So that's kind of on the back burner. But to your point about Tom saying we're already past the Rubicon, right? All the House committees are saying, the Department of Justice, FBI agents, they're all against us. Everyone's out to get you. They've all taken Trump's message of, I'm the victim and they're coming for me because they can't get to you. But, you've got Tom Cotton, Josh Hawley saying, oh, the entire, all of our federal prosecutors are corrupt. It's like, well, how does the system work if you guys are on the Judiciary Committee and you're telling everyone that this is all a lie and it's all garbage unless my side wins? Unless we are triumphant, everything is suspect, and you should disbelieve everything you hear or see because everyone's for sale except us and donate to our campaign right now. So it's a weird dynamic on the Hill.
I don't understand. Like, it's just astounding the way, just like this muscle memory here, the way it snaps back. Did they, do the campaigns? I mean, Celinda and Chris, you've been working on campaigns for years. I mean, you understand how campaigns operate, especially, I know you don't work for the Trump campaign, but, generally speaking, for the campaigns, do campaigns know this? Like, when you're faced with a dilemma, and God knows this is a historic dilemma, one candidate tried to overturn the last election. It's like, is there, like, as a pollster, do you advise the candidate, all right, this is how you do the messaging? Because I don't know if Trump did it like naturally or if it was strategized, but I mean, these results are astounding. We have
Well, I think that I think it's built on a platform of being polarized, and that we've been becoming increasingly polarized. I think it's made possible by social media. I mean, it's hard to imagine Walter Cronkite legitimizing this. And conspiracy theories run strong in America, left and right. And I'm just stunned at the kind of steady disinformation, misinformation. It's a New York AG, it's a New York jury, it's a, et cetera. He was just asking if there were 11,000 more votes. It wasn't asking you to find, you can hear the damn phone call, for God's sake. And that was to a Republican Secretary of State, I might add, who released it because that's what he thought he was being asked. But it's just amazing. And people are so channeled in their communication. There are no trusted sources anymore that cross ideology. There's no Walter Cronkite anymore or Huntley Brinkley to sort things out for us. And but I'm really stunned at the power of social media, the power of disinformation, misinformation. And it builds on a time of rising distrust in all institutions, including and specifically the media. The distrust of the media is really at an all-time high. So people are picking up, and we have a joke on our side of the aisle. A third of women say they rely on friends and family for their information. And we got two strategies there. We could get people new friends and family, but that's gonna be hard. Or we can get into those channels and start communicating more as friends and family, because our side tends to stand down more on that. We rely more on facts. We don't want to divide our personal networks, and it's just a very non-competitive environment.
You had Celinda, I was reading an article you were quoted in Columbia Journalism Review, Cam Joseph. You were doing a focus group, and the swing voters did not seem to be aware of this. Arguably like the most important criminal case against a former president of the United States. I hope it remains historically that way. I hope there's no repeats. They were not aware of this.
I know, I was stunned. I mean, people want to forget stuff. People have really short-term memories. They got a lot of problems on their plate, so they don't need additional ones. They're so sick of politics. But even I was stunned. I mean, we're doing these focus groups and we asked, and we were shorthanding. We said, well, what do you think about January 6th? January 6th. They go, what's January 6th? And it's like, what's January 6th? A day in infamy. And yeah, so people, they're just moving on. And people think it's also very political that these trials have taken as long as they have. And they're very suspicious that they're occurring in the election year, not realizing this is a deliberate Trump strategy to delay, delay, delay. So it's really complicated. And it's hard for people to get information they trust.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's like pick your own adventure, right? And that's how, and Celinda made such a great point about it, which is, we tune into outlets that conform or confirm our own biases, right? So we don't like to be confronted with perspectives that make us angry or, go against us. So we, people, it's interesting, like when we'll ask, like, where to get your news and information, as Celinda mentioned, you get it from social media, your friends. People also get it from podcasts. So I'm hoping that we have a lot of people listening to this podcast. But, we've actually asked, like, what podcast? And man, there's some rabbit holes people go down in terms of how they get their information, where they get their information. So there is not a shared understanding of what is actually happening, and that we're all literate with the current events in terms of the trials, or even in some cases, what's happening with access to abortion or contraception. People, I like Celinda, I was in a focus group and I used shorthand about like the Alabama IVF decision. And on the focus group, we're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And that was a pretty big decision that made a lot of coverage, made a lot of news headlines. But, we don't have a shared understanding of what is happening in our current events and what they mean objectively.
And this feels new-ish in terms of politics, maybe over the last 4 or 8 years or so. I don't remember it being this fractured before.
No, I think it's social. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying it's bad. You're right, Celinda.
Yeah, it's really different. And I think that that distrust is at an all-time high. I mean, we haven't had this since post-Watergate, and then it didn't extend to all the institutions it extends to. People just really are at a loss for where to get accurate information. They mostly trust information that comes from contradictory sources. Like if you have, CNN and Fox News as citations on something, then people will be more likely to believe it because they'll think they don't agree on anything. So if they agree on this, maybe it is true. I mean, people are really at a loss, and the loudest voices are dominating. And people that go, that doesn't seem right to me, they're not going to get in an argument about it, particularly women. And then the other thing that's happening is the unexpected is happening so often that, the unbelievable, and it's not just in politics. I mean, Maui's on fire. And I mean, if you had said to me, Maui's going to be one of the biggest one of the biggest fires generated by, I would have said, wait, isn't Maui in the middle of an ocean? I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, maybe Arizona, California, or a cargo ship takes a bridge down that's been there for 100 years. I mean, just the unimaginable is constantly happening. And so, okay, then I guess the unimaginable is believable. I mean, who's to say it's not? Since it happens every other day.
It's like it's 100-year rain event, 100-year flood, 100-year, right? We keep hearing that, like that these record-breaking events. The ocean is hotter than it's ever been, and I think it's too much for people. That emoji where your head like blows up.
Yes.
I think that's where people are right now.
I mean, what's the effects is it seems almost like trauma,
Mhm.
like where you just
Yeah.
shut down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is-
I've had women voters in focus groups say that, and I feel this myself, honestly, that they have to protect themselves. They have to
Oh,
like they'll say, I can only watch a very little amount of news because I have to protect myself. It's not good for me. I need to go out and mow the lawn. I need to do other things. So my exposure to news has to be both very limited and not that frequent because it's bad for me and my mental and physical health.
wow.
I mean, it's so interesting. We were just doing a study in Montana, and Montana, is a state very, very interested in their local news. And then when we asked, what's the local news feature that you like the best? And they go, the weather. And in fact, Montana local TV news has moved the weather to the first thing they start out with. And I think a lot, and they have the data that show a lot of people listen to the weather and then turn the damn thing off. And Montanans are all talking about the weather. So yeah, it's really, and people are very concerned about how it introduces conflict into their friendship networks, their communities,
Mm.
their kids' soccer coach, the lady they make cookies with for church. People are really very, very upset about it. Their neighbor.
When did this happen?
It's been growing, but I think social media is a major catalyst for it.
Because I mean, we used to be, I mean, I remember, at the beginning of the Trump administration, you pick up the Washington Post and there would be 8 Josh Dawsey bylines from the incredible Josh Dawsey, doing that guy does not sleep and doing incredible work. Um, but now, I see politicians trying to hitch a ride on the Taylor Swift wagon and, coming up late on that. Was there like a pivot point on this? Was it January 6th? Was it the midterms in 22? Or has it been gradual? Has it been steady?
I think I'm going to go back a little bit to the introduction of the phrase fake news.
Hmm.
That didn't really exist in our lexicon prior to Trump. So you could have, and when we talk to voters, they might say, oh, the New York Times sort of leans left, or the Wall Street Journal leans right. But there wasn't this like basic untruth about things,
Hmm.
fake media. And I feel like that has been now introduced into the bloodstream, and there's no inoculating against it now.
And it's very hard to discern. People, it turns out, have lousy skills to discern it. And I will forward something on my social media, and I'll have a staffer that comes in and said, that's not true. Right? So, no, I'm a pollster. I'm
No.
usually in the business of telling facts, not alternative facts. I did not know that was not true. I thought it was true. And they go, no, that's not true. And it's just like, oh shit. So I think it's very hard to sort it out anymore.
So,
God.
Celinda and Chris, let me ask you. I saw, one of your pieces on the, the block that's hardening, the double haters, the people who've had enough of this rematch already. They want out. They don't want Biden. They don't want Trump. They're willing to swap out candidates. They're RFK Jr. curious. They're open to anything else but what we have. And now you talk about this other group of people who just want to disconnect and get away from it. In the past few cycles, we've had this unknown block, this people who lied about supporting Trump and then they show up on election day and usher him through. We had the supposed red wave that was supposed to propel Republicans to full control, but then there was the abortion and January 6th backlash that kind of kept things where we are. What do you think is gonna? I mean, do you see this group of people who are maybe taking a little sabbatical and saying, no, I'm going to tune it out until August, November, whenever, past the conventions, we'll see how my bank account looks. We'll see how my 401k looks, or whatever their personal metric is. Is the border shut down? Is abortion illegal? Might they show up at the last moment, or will they stay home? And is it really going to be the diehards who figure it out and it's just mobilizing your base, and independents are just Sorry, you lost us already.
So that's a complicated question a little bit, but I first of all, it's May, and it is way too early for a lot of people to be focusing on a presidential election. That, I mean, these people, there's not like they need to tune in, find out something new about these two people, Biden and Trump. They feel like they know them, right? So then it's just politics. Now there is an element that's curious about Robert Kennedy Jr., but usually what happens with third party independent candidates is, they sort of poll a little bit higher, and then as it gets closer to the election, and certainly on election day, that sort of significantly diminishes. The other thing that I want to make sure that we don't do is look at double haters as like one cohort. People are in that group for different reasons, and there's different types of people who are in that group. But let's just say, for example, younger people, or younger people of color, or younger people. I think it's possible that a couple of things could happen. I think it's possible that some of them don't vote. I think it's possible that many of them will vote. And what we found in the 2022 elections, particularly with young people, which I thought was really interesting, was there was differential turnout depending on what they saw to be on the line. So, for example, if you were in a battleground state, or if abortion was on the ballot, you as a young person turned out at much higher levels than, say, if you lived in a purely red state that wasn't competitive at all, or a purely blue state that wasn't competitive at all. I think these people know when their votes matter and when they don't. So I think that we will see, particularly with as many as a dozen or more states that have abortion ballot initiatives, and then who knows what else comes to the forefront. I don't think it's going to be like, oh, I love Biden or I love Trump. It's going to be, if I don't vote this way, something, I'm going to lose something important, whether it's access to abortion, or the right to bear arms, or something of value.
Yeah, I think loss aversion is going to drive a lot of votes. The other thing is that initiatives are on the ballot, and initiatives can increase turnout for sure. And like, we have one fair wage initiatives, increasing the minimum wage initiatives in Michigan, Ohio, Arizona, Massachusetts. So there definitely can be some turnout issues there. The other thing I think is there's a new game in town. Oh, I'm sorry, my alarm is going off. It's time for me to get up.
Pager Dr. Lake.
There's a new game in town of people who say they're going to skip the first ballot and vote down the rest. That's been very rare. But, the uncommitted vote on our side of the aisle, at least, was very rare too. And it showed up in some states like Nevada and Michigan. So I don't know. I think some new configurations may emerge here depending on what happens.
Is there a historical corollary for this election? When was the last time we had
two incumbents running against each other?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really how the voters perceive it. And, it's interesting. When we were talking, Chris is the expert here, but when we were talking to Republican, I was doing a focus group with the Republican primary voters, and they were saying, we gotta reelect Trump, we gotta reinstate Trump. And the client we were doing them for, that is weird language. I said, no, it's not. They think he was elected president. And they think it was stolen from him. So they're all in on getting him back in. So I don't think we've ever had an election like this. It's also very rare for an incumbent reelect to be about the challenger in some respects. But of course, this challenger is an incumbent. But the Trump voters will vote Trump, and the Biden voters are going to vote Trump too.
I want to build on something that Warren mentioned here a second ago. And, in 2016, a lot of the polling industry missed Trump voters for a number of reasons, kind of the ghost Trump voters. And then conversely, you had the red wave turn into a red trickle, even like a blue, blue edge, certainly in 22. Are you guys, do you guys have a good sense of who are these secret voters this time? You know, how are we gonna, you know, where are we gonna wake up on it? Are we gonna wake up on November 5th and find out that it's Nicole Shanahan is president? You know, like
Well, I think she's only running for VP, right? Like
Right.
that would be something, wouldn't it? Oh my gosh. You know, that's a great question. And Celinda and I actually had sort of tossed around, do we write an article about who are pollsters missing this time? And of course, we don't know, right? I mean, if we knew, we would be fixing it. But there are some possibilities. So this is what something I'm finding in my work when, you know, you can do polling in different ways now. And a lot of us approach it with a mixed mode where you call, you know, you both call and text people, or you do, you know, an online survey. And you're with that, you're trying to get people who, if they don't answer the phone, then maybe they'll answer a text, or if they don't answer the text, then maybe you can find them in an online panel. But in the online polling that we're doing, I'm finding that with younger people of color, younger Black voters and younger Hispanic voters, I'm having to end up booting them out because they don't pass the quality control question. And I know this sounds a little wonky, but and like I'll tuck in a question sort of midway through the poll that's like an attention, you know, if you're not paying attention, if you're just like putting in responses, then if you answer it wrong, you get booted out. So we analyzed who was getting booted out in our just most recent national survey. And it's, you know, predominantly younger, you know, Black and younger Hispanic participants, and those with lower education of all race and ethnicity. So the point is, they, you know, they get kicked out of these polls because they're just like, you know, putting in bogus answers or whatever. But then but they exist. And are we not accounting for them in terms of they show up to vote? But they, you know, you can't, they're sort of going through these online surveys really quickly and just to get them done, to either get their little bonus, and then they won't answer a text or won't answer a phone. So that becomes a problem. And then, you know, oh yeah. And then just people who are less engaged, what polls tend to do is reach people who are more engaged, either, you know, willing to answer, willing to talk about it, but people who are less engaged, but then end up voting. And you know, not getting the less engaged people. And there are ways to work around that, but it gets a little wonky. I mean, Celinda.
I'm sorry. I mean,
No, go ahead.
do you, we see this movement among young Black men and Latinos towards Trump, or at least is this part of it? Is it being overrepresented for this reason? I mean, certainly the Trump campaign is leaning into it. I mean, he's always been into boxing and mixed martial arts and all that. And he's always been hanging out with Dana White. It's just now he starts advertising it more and does more, you know, Joe Rogan style podcasts, even though Rogan won't have him on. That's pretty interesting. What's going on with that? I mean, is there a real movement by younger Black men and Latinos towards him, or is this not? What's the sense?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in, but Celinda, I mean, I'd imagine you. I mean, I think among young Latino men, there is definitely a movement, and it's not just cultural; it's around the economy. Young Black men right now, they're moving that way. I mean, the Trump administration targeted young Black men aggressively in 2020, and the fruits of that labor really paid off in Milwaukee, for example, where our Black turnout was down and our Black vote was down from what we needed it to be, particularly to win that Senate race. And they did it with entrepreneurship and stuff like that. I think in the end, some of this is overstated. I think the African American vote will come home, but these voters are definitely cross-pressured. I think the phenomenon of the people not being correctly represented in the data is a little bit different. And they can complement each other. They can interact. But I think that it is harder to get younger men of color in your surveys, and we call more of them. I think all of the pollsters are getting more sophisticated about making sure that if a Trump voter, a model Trump voter turns us down, that we go get them and replace them with a model Trump voter, replace a non-college voter with a non-college voter, not a college educated voter. So there were some ways that refusals were being dealt with that were distorting results. I think a lot of that has been corrected. The private polls were definitely off in 2016, but they were a lot closer than the public polls. The public polls were off, but what we're all dealing with, and we now, for our clients internally, will often deliver two turnout models where we say,
Oh.
if turnout is this traditional, this is what the results will be. If turnout is higher or lower, this is what the results will be. Because I think it's getting, the hardest thing out there is to try to predict the turnout right now.
You know, Tom, I want to also just hop back to your original question, like, is what we're seeing among younger voters and then certainly younger Black men and younger Latino men real? Here's one thing that I think is really interesting, like particularly like when you look at the youth vote under, say, 34 or 30, depending on the source, it's jumping all over the place. Some have been finding them leaning towards Trump. Others see a big, Biden advantage. And what they're finding is some differences by mode. Like if you're calling people and you've got this sample of young people, and, I don't know, my daughter is 23 and she's not going to answer the phone. She's just like, heck no, I don't want to talk to somebody on the phone. But so I think that there's a mode effect, and also in a lot of these public polls that people are consuming, the sample of young people, or in fact a lot of cohorts, or particularly like young Black men, is so small that they are making, the margin of error is so big. They're like saying, look at this is happening. But when you go in and when you do, let's say privately, a poll of Black Americans that's like 3,000 sample, you get a much different story than if you're looking at a small cohort that is a subset of, the New York Times poll, for example, which is a good poll, but it's their job isn't to like have enough interviews in every single cohort.
I was thinking about this a little bit when I was putting together one of the 20,000 beefsteaks rankings for Trump this cycle, because God knows that's its own cottage industry. And I had a number of people saying, Tim Scott's going to be in there because he'll help bring over Black voters, but also floating Ben Carson for that reason. And it reminded me a lot, because it's just in my very highly anecdotal reporting, I don't see Tim Scott really moving Black voters. Ben Carson, on the other hand, yes. And it reminded me a lot of when I covered the gay marriage battle in the Maryland State House in 2011, because the Republicans that were fighting it went to work on Black pastors and Black voters in Prince George's County, Maryland. And it worked. It worked at the margins. I mean, you're not like changing 60% of the vote, but it's enough that you had enough state senators feeling the pressure on that. And that Carson, frankly, reminds me of that. He kind of that quiet type of a Black conservative, middle class. And certainly, out in Indiana, number of folks like that too. It makes me wonder about these things. What's the well? I'm not going to monopolize everything. Warren, our resident Virginia expert down here.
But Virginia's fine and dandy. Governor Youngkin is fulfilling all of our hopes and dreams, as he promised. Free sweater vest for everyone. Everything is great. But yeah, no, Celinda and Chris, I do have a question for you in terms of the unknowables and weird things that we've now just take for granted as part of an election. Evidently, the FBI and DOJ just have to insert themselves into every race now. They have to poke around on candidates, and Merrick Garland has to somehow wear all these hats. So We already know that this is the first criminal trial of a former president is happening. 3 others are waiting in the wings. Meanwhile, Hunter Biden has some sort of plea deal somewhere that may or may not come to a fruition or be completed before the end of this year. Do any of these things, do you think they'll move the needle at all, or are people already baked into, oh right, yeah, all of our elected officials are probably under indictment for something, so let's move past that and just see where we land?
Well, I think I'm worried that this election interference case is getting processed by the voters as a hush money case. And that voters think, well, who in their right mind wouldn't pay off their mistress? And who wants to run for office and not have everybody who's going to say bad things about you, not saying them? And, every rich guy pays off his mistress and every rich guy conducts business fraud. That's how they're rich. So I don't like it, but this is not a distinguishing characteristic. I think the election interference part of this is getting lost a little bit. And it's a complicated case because the election's 2016, the action is 2017. Like, how can. So I think that January 6th and the Georgia cases are the ones that are really convincing. And if we got a conviction on January 6th, that would make a difference to voters. I think it would mobilize younger Democrats and Democratic men in particular, and it would alienate a certain proportion of Republicans for sure. The problem is that the Trump legal team has engaged very aggressively and apparently effectively in delaying court cases. And, America's understanding of the court system is influenced by Law and Order episodes. So they don't understand how come the trial can't occur in a 60-minute block. Like, Law and Order gets it done, why can't you? I think that this is a big part of our problem, is that the order of the cases is not serving very well to make this seem like anything other than politics as usual and the pox on both your houses.
It reminds me
I
of
will say one thing that voters are very united about, and we just completed some research on this. They think the idea that any president, would be immune is ridiculous. And that they feel that they truly understand that they think would be ridiculous. And they do think that Trump would ask for that. So that is very, very, the voters are very, very against that.
You know what I thought might happen isn't seeming like it's entirely happening. And this is where I thought there'd be a bigger backlash. So if Trump, like, it's not the conviction per se, particularly since the Stormy Daniels case is the first case. I agree with Celinda. It's like sort of perceived as the least serious, the least bad actor kind of, thing that he could have done. I thought that what might happen is he would be so angry and so focused on these trials that he would stop talking to people about things they cared about and only talk about his persecution, his, and just basically, him going off about him, and how this was so terrible, and like whatever was said in court that day, him going out on a rally and like having some sort of just cathartic, rant about it. But I have to credit his team. I mean, he's still, sort of talking about things in relation to other voters. Like, I'm doing this for you, they're persecuting me for you. Like, he's still, I mean, I don't really tune into his rallies, so I don't know entirely what he's doing, but I was expecting that there might be a little bit more backlash if he just, like, if it all circled around him and his experience at the trial and how unfair, and like relitigating that. But I think they're still doing a fairly decent job of communicating with voters about issues and things that they actually care about.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, Chris. I agree with that. And I agree that he's, he's mixing in these events like the VP Summit, the rally, in a very, very effective way. And it's interesting because they're a little bit rare. He gets quite a bit of coverage on it, where president can be out there every day on a new infrastructure project and doesn't break through at all. So it's very frustrating.
How do you, I mean, if you're the Biden team, and Celinda, of course, you're working with the president again here for this cycle to reelect. How do you get through to voters? Or how do you get through to us in the press? I mean, that's the better question.
Yeah, that's part of the conduit. Well, I think repetition. I think you got to get out of the rose garden. I think a lot of the things they're doing now are good. You got to get the whole team out. And I think contrast. I personally believe there are no victory laps in this country right now for anybody. I mean, people are just too upset about things. But I think in contrast, and our research has shown privately, not for the administration, that if you're in contrast, you get more credit, and you raise a fundamental question like, who are things going to be better off for? And I think the contrast message is really, really important. And what do you want the issue agenda to be? Do you want to repeal Obamacare? Or do you want to give it to and to give a new tax break, another tax break to corporations who are paying zero taxes now, and to CEOs that just got bonus for screwing you? Or you want to invest in healthcare and expand mental health care in our schools? It's a clear choice. You can make it. You decide.
Is this working? I mean, you guys are experts, in particularly among women voters and swing voters. I was thinking about the Pennsylvania primary just a couple weeks ago, where Nikki Haley is not running. She's in a think tank, is on the ballot and pulls down 17% of the vote. I mean, what's the attitude? Yeah.
A Haley vote, Tom. It was always an anti-Trump vote. And that, it still exists.
That's right. I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, Pennsylvania, you can have this stuff at the margins where you try to like rewrite the rules in Maine and Nebraska, for like a single electoral vote. But it seems like, I mean, of the swing states, I mean, you gotta really try to nail down as many as you can. But Pennsylvania, I mean, I'm gonna use a Pennsylvania pun. It is the keystone here. You have to win it. I was astounded by that, particularly in the collar counties around Philadelphia. That was remarkable. Does anything, because I think about this in terms
I think
of
there are a lot of suburban women who like Nikki Haley of all parties, actually. But here's my secret challenge, and I have challenged Chris on this because I want to be the two of us involved in it. I think in 2028, both parties should nominate a woman, and then we'll get our woman president. Because the voters will have no choice. So let's all commit on this podcast to go do that in 2028.
This is how progress happens in America. No choice.
If we can't go forward, we're going to back you into a corner and get progress one way or the other.
Do you think, this whole Veeps thing that's going on right now with Trump, I mean, does that have the potential to move the numbers one way or another? Because I've heard this debate, over if you could even, I mean, you put on a governor that shoots puppies. Does that pick up some new demographic for you? Does it move anything? I've heard a lot of people say that it doesn't do anything for you.
Yeah, it's coming from Montana, that Kristi Noem thing. That is a cultural difference, man. That is so. I am just stunned at how that was perceived coming from Montana.
For real.
Yeah, where I grew up, that wouldn't have been considered that odd. But nobody's going to talk about it now.
Oh my gosh, Celinda! Wow. Okay. Yeah. Well,
we'll have to talk about that off the record with lots of alcohol.
Wow. That's the thing. And I was very keen, not keen as in liking her, but I really thought Kristi Noem had like the inside track. And the best agreed with me. Yeah. I really thought, she looks the part. She's got that whole, just that whole thing going on. And I really thought she had the inside track, but there is absolutely no way. I mean, Trump hates dogs. He always says, like, in a pejorative, like, he's, he he was sweating like a dog and, you know, treated me like a dog. I mean, like, he doesn't like dogs,
But America does.
but America
He's a
does.
secret cat person.
Like, you can
America likes cats too.
not have a VP who shoots their dog. No.
No.
Oh,
Not nationwide anyway.
yeah. I mean, in fact, didn't Tim Scott do an ad with his dog? Or maybe no, you know who, and I'm thinking of Raphael Warnock, so I'm not even thinking of the right party. But yeah, I mean, yeah, you don't have to be a dog lover, but you absolutely cannot be a dog shooter. No.
There's the quote of the evening for your podcast. There's no plus or minus 5% on that prediction.
Well, I was kind of, Celinda, I was kind of wondering about that because, I mean, it's rural. I mean, I don't know. I grew up in the suburbs of Baltimore. I don't know what goes on.
Well, I grew up on a ranch in Montana, and I'm not talking about it.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean,
Okay,
I'm sure she read that book.
Okay. Oh no. But anyway,
No.
The whole VP thing, though, is broader than that and what VPs mean.
And I'm telling you, this election is not coming down to rural voters in Montana or South.
No, they're not. That's a good point.
Around, as you said, Tom, around the Philly suburbs, around the Atlanta suburbs, around the Phoenix suburbs, around the Milwaukee suburbs. I mean, no and no and no. And around the
Detroit. A lot of suburban moms do not want to explain to their kids how come the VP taught the puppy.
Listen,
that's just not going to be a conversation moms are going to invite.
People who live in the suburbs buy raincoats for their dogs.
Yeah.
You walk around the neighborhood and there is not a dog on a rainy day that doesn't have a coat on. Now, seriously, I mean, yeah. Sorry, this gets me a little hot under the collar.
Dog lovers.
Yeah.
But yeah, also don't shoot your dog.
Yeah.
Just, yeah. Anyway,
well, who's got the inside tracked out? Because the whole premise of Kristi Noem is that she again looks the part, and she could, somehow parlay Trump popularity to suburban women. I mean, it's the same. How many elections we've had with him now? 3 elections with Trump, and it's the same dynamic. I guess I don't even know how you do that. I mean, who would do that? Would anybody do that? Can anybody? Marsha Blackburn? I've seen her name pop up a lot recently.
That's interesting, Tom, because I haven't seen that. But I'm thinking, like Mike Pence was a strategy for, you wrote the book, right? Like, there's a whole strategy behind that. But the people they're throwing around now, like JD Vance and even Marco Rubio, I mean, you're looking at Trump, and he is an old lion, right? And so why would he want a young lion on his ticket with him? Because then he is the old lion, and he looks like, he doesn't look the way I would assume he wants to look, which is like the alpha. I am the alpha lion. I am the old lion. I am the king. And you get a younger version of him, like a JD Vance, then what happens to Trump? I actually think, like, and I don't know who the leading woman would be. Like, I thought it would dog thing, Kristi Noem, but now I feel like it has to be a woman. I feel like it has to be a woman, and the campaign in their mind is thinking, let's get a woman, and they want to contrast her to Kamala, and and they want somebody who look at this exemplary woman, and then look at Kamala Harris, and there's going to be some ugly stuff, I think. But I feel like it has to be a woman, and I don't know who that is. But Marsha Blackburn, that's interesting, Tom. I have not seen that.
She wouldn't upstage him. That's job number 1 in his world.
Has that look, look he likes.
Yeah.
Which I know sounds terrible to come out of my mouth, but I'm not.
It's him.
The criteria I would use.
Yes.
Does.
Yeah. I remember a number of folks were saying, last year, I kept on talking up Noem, and they're like, why are you talking up Noem? There's all these allegations of the affair and all that. And I'm like, because it's Trump. It's not, it's not Biden selecting somebody new for the ticket. It's Trump making the selection. You got to think about what's going on in his head, in his world. which again, central casting.
He's going to want somebody who can talk about the abortion issue. I mean, he's saying state rights, it's state rights, but he knows he's vulnerable in that. He does. And he very rarely will, you can't really, well, you know, he doesn't really telegraph what he thinks he's vulnerable on unless he then starts accusing his opponent of being whatever that is. That's the number one key for Trump. Like, I'm not going to threat democracy. It's Biden that's a threat to democracy. I'm not unstable. Hillary Clinton's unstable. You know, that's what he does. But I think it's going to be a woman. They're going to think it needs to be a woman.
Well, and I think there is a challenge here, and I think Chris has been the leader of it in her party. The Republicans have to prove that they give an SHIT about women. I mean, they're on the brink of generating a record gender gap. And so I think a woman, and I think, well, they would never pick Haley because of the way she took them on. It was a cautionary tale for them because she was so well received.
The way it coalesced with her, I mean, there was that period, like I would say, you know, right after Iowa, where it had the potential to be like a Ted Cruz coalescing, similar to 16. Obviously, it didn't come together that way. They put that one, they took it out back and put it in the gravel pit real fast. Yeah, it worked.
This is not going to be like an analogy we use now. We're not going to start.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Things dying in the gravel pit. That is not.
That's pretty funny.
Well, Warren, what you got, man? You got anything that does not involve a gravel pit?
No, I'm all out of dead dog jokes. Sorry, you guys have beat this horse to death. Sorry.
So
I love dogs. I just want to be on the record of that.
I know you do. Good person.
I grew up with dogs all the time, multiple dogs. I grew up on a ranch.
Talking about a culture, and you are a good person who loves all animals.
Oh, you guys, this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
It's been great.
Celinda Lake, Chris Matthews.
Chris is my heroine.
You guys,
back at you.
Your columns in USA Today. I'm telling you, that is, you know, I get them they hit my Google alerts. And is it once a month? Is that about the regularity?
Yeah.
Yeah, they've been great.
Oh, thank you.
You guys nailed the double hater voters before everyone else. I mean, shocked to find out a couple of veteran pollsters with their fingers on the pulse.
It's really fun doing it.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Talk soon.
Awesome. See you guys.